Hey, this is John from Alloy 211. Today's video is on the 1888 Lee-Metford Bayonet. I also saw it called the P88 bayonet. And the Lee-Metford part is also kind of a misnomer because they used it on a variety of rifles, as it was in service from 1888 to 1903, and with the British there were several different rifles that occurred during that time period, and it was used on pretty much all of them from what I saw. And I won't get into the variety because it's quite a few different rifles they used it on. There are two reasons as to why I decided to bring this bayonet to you today. One, if you've watched my channel before and you've seen my video on a surprise piece of World War I history, you'll know that I use this as a background filler for that video. And I didn't actually talk about the bayonet or really anything about it, so I thought, well, you know what, I'll go ahead and do a video on it, so that way, you know, I've talked about the history of this as well, rather than just used it as a background filler. But then also I thought, too, it's an interesting piece of history. And that's the second reason as to why I wanted to make this video. And partially that's because this is a bayonet that has been around in my life since my childhood. My father had it when I was a kid, and I had always grown up with it. And, you know, it's something that as a child I really did not appreciate the history of this. And I think this is something that we do, and I kind of talked about this in other videos, somewhat, or touched on it, that we'll have something and maybe we have it even in our daily lives, and we never really consider the amount of history or the background that there may be to this object that we've never really looked into, or that we just don't appreciate. And I think we as people even do this with other people too, people who are in our daily lives that, you know, we just know every day. Rather than appreciate things about them, we just kind of forget about that. And it's kind of the same thing with something like this, because as a child, to me, this was just a big knife. You know, it wasn't really a bayonet. I mean, maybe as I got a little older and I understood what the bayonet was, then yeah, okay, now it's just a bayonet. But I never really considered the history behind this piece. And there's quite a bit more history than what I realized even before I did the research for this video. I mean, I realized that there's probably some history to it, but not as much as what there actually is. And part of that, and I think part of what's important is I really enjoy and appreciate history, is that too often when we look back in time and on history, we think about events and the repercussions of events and what caused events, which is important, but many times we forget, in fact I think a lot of times we forget that there were individual people. You know, from these different time periods we look back and we remember a handful of people. I mean, just literally a handful. And really there were thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people involved in these events. And many times we just gloss over the individuals and forget about them. And I think that that's too bad, really. Anyway, there were individuals that had this particular bayonet on what would appear to be several different continents and probably in different conflicts. And that's something I never really realized about this particular piece, is that this thing is well traveled. It has been around the world in many ways, and I never appreciated that until really honestly now. And that's mostly because I didn't realize how far flung this may have been. But then also too, it's because I just looked at it as a bayonet, or I looked at it as just another knife, another bayonet, when really there's something interesting and unique about this from a historic perspective. Now, I'm not going to actually get into all of that, which you'll see why here in a moment, but I'll go over the high points of it and just the high points of this bayonet. This particular bayonet is what is called a Mark I Type II, which is indicated by the fact that it has 2 rivets and a oil clearance hole at the rear of the second rivet. That distinguishes it from what would be considered a Mark I first type, which has 3 rivets. It actually has 2 rivets up here. And so, I mean, that is an obvious dead giveaway as to a Type 1. The Type 2 is actually the most common of these bayonets, so it's the one that you're probably going to run into the most. They actually had 4 types overall. The Type 3, or sorry, pardon me, the Type 2, the clearance hole was moved from here to the pommel, and was intended solely for the Lee-Enfield rifle. And then the Mark III, the hilt was browned and the rivets were changed to screws with nuts. So generally the same pattern, just some changes to the handle. I mean, just some general changes, but still the same pattern bayonet overall. Now we'll kind of get into the markings a little bit, and that's where this becomes interesting. And that's because, well, let's try to get up here and get close. I mean, maybe it's interesting overall, but I mean, that's what got really interesting to me. As you can see, there are a lot of markings there. And I just assumed that all of these had these markings on it like that until I started doing some research on it, which they do pretty much all have these markings. And they may have another mark there too. I mean, this isn't all the markings they could have here. There's actually quite a wide variety of markings that these can have. And if you want to get into it, into minutia, you can look it up, and there's a lot there. But what I didn't realize, a lot of these markings here are reproofs, or not reproofs, but re-inspections of it from when it's been taken back in and back out to service and such. So all of these are indications of, not all of them, I shouldn't say that, not all of them, but some of these are indications of that. And I thought, wow, that is a lot more interesting than what I had thought. The ones we're going to try to concentrate on here is a crown with the VR underneath it, which stands for Victoria Regina, which is the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. So this places that, and it will have that on there if she was the monarch when this was produced. They would have a different marking if it was a different monarch. Oh, that actually looks pretty good. Down here, well, let's get into this while I have it here. Wilkinson's of London, that is the manufacturer. And go over to the back here. The X is the proof mark for it that passed the bend test. The broad arrow, you can see the broad arrow with the WD is War Department. And the crown in 35, I'm not actually totally sure what that is. I think it's the Wilkinson Inspector is what I think from other things that I saw, but I didn't actually see it written out like that for this particular symbol, so I don't want to say that, but I'm pretty sure that is what it is that it's for the Wilkinson Inspector. And I believe, it's kind of hard to tell, there's a date code here, but it's been overstamped. Try to get it up there. Overstamped so much, I have a hard time seeing what the second number is. I believe it's 6, 9, and I don't know for sure what this number would be. But more than likely, given that it's a Victoria and a couple other factors, it's a Mark I Type 2, that it is actually sometime in the 1890s. I mean, that would make sense too, as, you know, it ran from 1888 to 1903, so it's most likely going to be in the 1890s. And I'm not totally sure what year. I mean, with the way it's overstamped, right up here again, I'll let you guys maybe take a look so you can correct me on it. But that is a 9, and the second number, I have no idea honestly what it is, because it's just been struck or something. It might be 90. I don't know, because then there's a little crown right there. Either way, and there's a 505. I don't know for sure what that is. I mean, this thing has a lot of marks on it. Anyway, that is the period of time when, between the Boer Wars and World War I, when this could have been used. And that puts a lot of history on it, and not just that, it shows that it could have very well been on different continents. And then when you think about all the colonial activity of the British in this time period, it's very likely that it could have traveled between 3 continents and 4, because then it came here to America, where I am, at some point. And I think that that is really interesting. To me, that is really interesting, because this is something, again, I had in my life, my whole life, and I never really appreciated the fact that this one had been around the world generally. I mean, not around the world, but around the globe generally, more than most people ever get. And not only that, now as an adult, I look at it, and when I look at it, I can think, wow, people use this in these different places, or probably in these different places, and you can look at the bayonet and you can see marks on it. You know, did this mark come from when someone was pounding something on it? Or this mark here? You know, is this darkening of the top of the blade, is that from it being fired on the rifle? I noticed too when I was oiling the release, which I'll get into that in a second, but I noticed too that this end of the pummel, let's see if I can get it in frame, is actually mushroomed out slightly, as if someone was using this to hammer something, you know. And was that done later? I mean, it's been a long time since it was in service, so someone could have used this later as a hammer. Or did someone, when this was in service, desperately need some way to hammer something and they used their bayonet in a moment of desperation? Or maybe not even desperation. Maybe just they felt like, oh, I need to use this as a hammer. For all I know, the guy could have killed himself. I mean, a bayonet makes a terrible hammer. You know, you go to hit the thing and it bounces back up into your eye. Well, you're blind, or maybe dead. So that's a tip for all you people out there that may want to use a knife as a hammer. Not a good idea. Anyway, like I said, there's a lot of history into a piece like this that we don't even ever really consider. And I think that that's too bad. It's too bad that we don't appreciate things in that manner oftentimes, or that we just fail to see them. Oh, I was going to get back to this button, on the release button, because I found this interesting. You know, this is an 1888 pattern bayonet, and it uses a very similar release to my VZ24 bayonet. If you look, you have a button, slides out. It's got a little lock right there. I mean, a lot of rifles use this, and obviously, because this is for a 98 pattern Mauser, and this is for a British pattern bolt-action rifle. But I found it really interesting that essentially this release is the same release. I mean, it is essentially exactly the same. So I thought that was kind of cool. It's like, huh, two different bayonets made in very different times, 30 years apart, still using that same release. So I thought that was kind of cool when I was just kind of looking over things. But also these marks too, these could be indications of repair or reissue, or repair and reissue. But the one thing that's interesting too, and I can't remember for sure where the mark would be, I think it would be on this side, but there is a mark for when it's been taken out of service, when it's been found to be faulty, and it's been relegated to parade duty, which at that point, or drill duty, sorry, not parade duty, but drill duty. And it'll have a backwards R and an R together, and that means that it has been taken out of service and put into drill duty. So I thought that was interesting that this does not appear to have that. This was in service up until it was not. So I thought that was pretty cool. And who knows how long this was in service for. I'm pretty sure that it was sometime in the 20s when it was originally purchased, so probably some point not too long before that. And again, you know, you look at this, you think it's a bayonet. But it's not just a bayonet, it's a bayonet that has seen conflicts that we'll never see. It's a bayonet that has seen hammering at some point, and we'll never know. Was that hammering of a soldier desperate, or was that the hammering of somebody who just decided to use it as a hammer? Or was it the hammering of someone who blinded themselves shortly after thinking, this is a good idea to use this as a hammer? And not to say, you know, and I won't say that I've never used the pommel of a hammer, or a pommel of a knife for a hammer. I have. And there may be times where you do have to do that. But generally, if you need to hammer something, use a hammer. I hope you liked the video. I hope you've learned something about this bayonet and maybe take away a bit of more appreciation for history. I'm sure that there are a lot of people watching this video who already appreciate history a lot, and I'm glad that you do. I do too. If you liked the video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you watched some of my other videos and you enjoy those too, I'd really appreciate if you subscribed. And in general, I hope you have a good day. Oh, and tomorrow is the 4th of July, and it would be wrong of me not to wish everyone a happy 4th of July. Whether you're in America or not, I understand it's an American holiday, but part of it is the spirit and the idea of the 4th of July. And that's to the people too who are like, it's not really the day American Independence Day. And it's like, that's true. to a certain extent, but it's the idea of it, and it's the idea of human rights for all, as enshrined by the Bill of Rights. And I really wish everyone around the world could celebrate that idea, and I think it's a great idea. So, happy 4th of July to everyone in the world. Thanks. Have a good day.